February 18th, 1965, 3:47 a.m. Small's Paradise, 2294 Adam Clayton Powell Jr. Boulevard. 7 of Bumpy Johnson's operations had been hit in 12 hours. The Colombo crew torched his number spot on 135th Street, smashed the jukebox at Lenox Lounge, broke every bottle behind the bar at Red Rooster. The message was carved into the door at his Policy Bank on 147th, Italian property now. They were demanding $50,000 weekly, or Harlem would burn. Bumpy Johnson sat at his usual corner table, calm. Too calm. Had been out of Alcatraz 20 months. Word on the street said the old man had gone soft. Prison had broken him. The Italian families, Genovese, Lucchese, and now Joe Colombo's newly named crew, they sensed blood in the water. They wanted Harlem, all of it. Across from Bumpy sat Vincent Chickie Rotolo, Colombo's enforcer, 6 feet of Brooklyn muscle with a .38 special tucked under his coat. He was grinning. Behind him 3 soldiers, armed. The club had gone silent. 73 witnesses held their breath. 3 weeks earlier, Bumpy Johnson had been a ghost. Ellsworth Raymond Johnson, Bumpy for the knot of scar tissue on the back of his skull, had ruled Harlem since the 1930s. Numbers, narcotics, protection. He was the bridge between Black Harlem and the Italian mob, the only man who could negotiate with Lucky Luciano and keep Harlem independent. But while Bumpy spent 11 years in Alcatraz for drug conspiracy, the landscape had shifted. New players, new ambitions, new disrespect. He returned to Harlem in June 1963 to a hero's welcome and impromptu parade down Lenox Avenue, with neighbors cheering from fire escapes. But respect in the streets doesn't translate to fear in boardrooms. The Italian families had grown comfortable during his absence. They'd expanded into Harlem's betting parlors, loan operations, and heroin distribution. Joe Colombo, Wood just taken control of the old Profaci family in 1963, saw Bumpy's return as an opportunity, not to negotiate, to conquer. By February 1965, the temperature had reached boiling point. Colombo's crew had been testing boundaries for months, small encroachments, unpaid tributes, disrespected territories. The attacks on February 17th weren't random vandalism. They were a declaration of war. The Italians wanted Harlem's weekly take of $375,000 from the numbers racket alone, and they figured an old man who'd spent a decade in prison couldn't stop them. They had no idea what Bumpy Johnson had been planning since the day he walked out of Alcatraz. Vincent Chickie Rotolo wasn't just muscle. He was a made man with 17 confirmed hits to his name. Had earned his reputation in Brooklyn during the Gallo-Profaci War, where he personally executed 3 rival soldiers in a social club on President Street. Efficient, ruthless, no witnesses. When Joe Colombo reorganized the family and looked to expand into Harlem, Chickie was his first call. The enforcer had already brought 4 Harlem policy operators to heel in January 2, paid up immediately. 1 fled to Philadelphia, and 1 was found floating in the East River with his tongue cut out. Chickie wanted what every ambitious mobster wants: territory, tribute, and respect. Harlem represented all 3. The neighborhood generated more cash than half of Brooklyn's rackets combined. But it was protected by an old man with a prison record. In Chickie's mind, this was easy money. Bumpy Johnson was 60 years old, had been locked away during the mob's golden age. The game had changed. What made Chickie dangerous wasn't his gun, it was his backing. Joe Colombo commanded 150 made men across New York. The Colombo family controlled unions, politicians, judges. They had the NYPD's organized crime unit in their pocket. If Bumpy resisted, Chickie had the green light to eliminate him, permanently. On February 17th, Chickie had delivered the ultimatum personally. He walked into Small's Paradise at midnight, ordered bourbon, and told Bumpy's lieutenant exactly what would happen. 50 grand a week or we take it all. Tell Bumpy Hess got 24 hours. Then he torched 7 locations across Harlem to prove he wasn't bluffing. 24 hours later, Chickie returned to collect. He brought 3 soldiers, 2 guns, and absolute confidence that Bumpy Johnson would either pay or die. Chickie's plan was textbook mob intimidation show overwhelming force, make the target feel isolated, and extract maximum profit with minimum bloodshed. Had chosen Small's Paradise deliberately. The club was Bumpy's throne room, where he held court every Thursday night, surrounded by jazz musicians, politicians, and Harlem elite. Hitting him there, in front of his people, would humiliate him. It would show every numbers runner, every policy banker, every street captain that Bumpy Johnson couldn't protect his own house. The psychology was surgical. Break the legend, and the empire crumbles. The club smelled of cigarette smoke, bourbon, and expensive perfume. Red leather booths lined the walls beneath gold-framed mirrors. The stage sat empty. The band had packed up hours ago when Chickie's crew arrived. Dim amber lights cast long shadows across the black and white checkered floor. Behind the mahogany bar, owner Big Will Richardson stood frozen, his hand hovering near the telephone. 73 people remained inside: waitresses, late-night drinkers, musicians, street players, all of them trapped. At 3:47 a.m., Chickie had placed a leather briefcase on Bumpy's table. 50,000, cash, right now. His voice carried across the silent room. And that's just this week. Next week, same time, same place. We're your partners now, old man. At 3:49 a.m., one of Chickie's soldiers, Tommy Hooks Mancini, moved to the club's entrance. He locked the door, flipped the sign to closed. His message was clear: nobody leaves until this is settled. At 3:52 a.m., Chickie's second soldier, Paulie Gamelli, walked the perimeter. He checked. Windows. Marked exits. His hand rested on the .45 automatic in his waistband. The third soldier, Anthony Ant DiGiorgio, positioned himself near the kitchen entrance. Textbook containment. At 3:54 a.m., tension coiled tighter. A woman near the back, Loretta Hayes, a waitress who had worked Smalls for 19 years, dropped a glass. It shattered. The sound exploded through the silence like a gunshot. Everyone flinched. At 3:56 a.m., Chickie leaned forward, his cologne mixed with gun oil. You hearing me, Bumpy? Or did prison make you deaf? At 3:57 a.m., Bumpy Johnson finally looked up. His eyes were obsidian, unreadable. He took a slow sip of cognac. 73 people watched, waited. The room held its breath. Then, what Chickie didn't know was that Bumpy Johnson had orchestrated this entire encounter. 3 weeks earlier, the same night Chickie first made his demands, Bumpy had placed a phone call to Frank Costello, the Prime Minister of the underworld. Costello was semi-retired, living quietly in Manhattan, but he still commanded respect from every Italian family in New York. Bumpy and Costello went back 30 years, to the days when they'd negotiated the peace between Lucky Luciano and the Harlem numbers operators. One conversation, one favor called in. Costello made 2 phone calls, one to Carlo Gambino, one to Tommy Lucchese. The message was simple: Bumpy, Johnson is off limits. Colombo is acting without commission approval. 2 weeks earlier, Bumpy had visited Joe Colombo's social club in Bensonhurst. He didn't bring soldiers. He brought documentation. Ledgers showing the Colombo family's heroin operation in Red Hook evidence that could put Joe away for life. Bumpy had spent 11 years in Alcatraz building relationships with connected inmates from every family in America. Had traded information, built leverage, collected insurance policies. He laid the ledgers on Colombo's desk and spoke 4 sentences. Your boy Chickie is moving on Harlem without your permission. Has skimming from your operations to fund his expansion. If he succeeds, you'll have a war with Gambino and Lucchese. Or you can let me handle him. 1 week earlier, Bumpy had arranged for Chickie's 3 soldiers, Tommy, Paulie, and Anthony, to each receive a personal visit. Not threats, opportunities, employment offers. Double their current salary to work for Bumpy when this was over. 2 accepted immediately. The third, Tommy Hooks, needed persuading. Bumpy showed him photographs Tommy's wife having lunch with a federal prosecutor. The message was clear: cooperate or become a liability to your own family. Now, at 3:58 a.m. in Small's Paradise, the trap snapped shut. Bumpy reached into his jacket. Chickie's hand moved toward his gun, but Bumpy pulled out a single photograph. He slid it across the table. The photograph showed Chickie in Atlantic City, January 23rd, meeting with the Scarfo family from Philadelphia, negotiating behind Joe Colombo's back, planning to overthrow him once Harlem was secured. Chickie's face went white, then the door opened. Joe Colombo walked in. 6 of his captains followed. The temperature in Small's Paradise dropped 20 degrees. Colombo looked at Chickie, then at Bumpy. His voice was ice. This man works for you now, Mr. Johnson. Do with him what you will. Bumpy stood. He buttoned his jacket, walked to Chickie, leaned close. You came for my kingdom, but kings don't lose to men who can't see 3 moves ahead. You wanted $50,000 a week? Now you're going to pay me that, for protection, from your own family. At 4:03 a.m., Vincent Chickie Rotolo was escorted out of Small's Paradise by Joe Colombo's captains. He wouldn't be seen in public for 6 months. When he resurfaced, he was running a small bookmaking operation in Canarsie, demoted, humiliated, neutered. His 3 soldiers would accompanied him that night. Tommy Hooks became one of Bumpy's most trusted enforcers. Paulie Gamelli moved to Las Vegas to work casino security. Anthony DiGiorgio wisely requested a transfer to the Colombo family's operations in Florida. None of them wanted to stay in New York after witnessing what happened when you underestimated Bumpy Johnson. The witnesses inside Small's Paradise, all 73 of them, walked out into the pre-dawn Harlem air with a story that would be repeated in barbershops, churches, and street corners for decades. How Bumpy Johnson had turned a mob execution into a negotiation. How Head made the Italians beg for peace. How Head secured Harlem's independence not with guns, but with intelligence that took 11 years in Alcatraz to gather. By 10 a.m. on February 18th, every mob crew in New York knew the score. The Commission, the ruling body of New York's 5 families, held an emergency meeting at 3 p.m. that afternoon. The decision was unanimous. Harlem belongs to Bumpy Johnson. Any interference requires Commission approval. The vote was 5-0. Even Joe Colombo raised his hand. Bumpy's position after that night was unassailable. Had proven that age and prison time hadn't diminished his strategic mind. Had demonstrated that intelligence networks and political leverage were worth more than muscle. Most importantly, had shown every ambitious young gangster that Harlem wasn't a prize to be taken, it was a kingdom to be respected. February 18, 1965 became a turning point in organized crime history because it proved that traditional mob expansion tactics couldn't work against a strategist who understood both world's black Harlem and the Italian underworld. Bumpy Johnson's victory that night wasn't just personal, it protected Harlem's economic independence for the remaining 3 years of his life. The Colombo family never attempted another incursion. The Genovese crew, which had been watching Chickie's play closely, backed off entirely. Harlem's numbers racket, its policy banks, its street-level operations remained under local control. That autonomy allowed black entrepreneurs to build wealth that would fund the next generation of legitimate Harlem businesses. What this reveals about Bumpy is the core of his philosophy. Violence is the last resort of men who can't think. Every gangster can pull a trigger, but only a master can turn enemies into tributaries, transform threats into income streams, and convert vulnerability into dominance. Bumpy understood that true power isn't about controlling territory. It's about controlling information, relationships, and leverage. He spent 11 years in Alcatraz not just surviving, but networking with every connected inmate who passed through. He turned prison into graduate school. The universal lesson transcends organized crime. Real power isn't about guns, muscles, or loud threats. It's about knowing what others don't, moving 3 steps ahead, building alliances before you need them, making your enemies believe confrontation was their idea right up until the moment they realize they're trapped in a game they can't win. If this story showed you why Bumpy Johnson was the smartest man to ever run Harlem, hit that subscribe button. Drop a like if you understand the difference between strength and power. Comment below, what would you have done in Bumpy's position next week? We're covering the night Frank Lucas thought he could take over after Bumpy died, and learned the hard way that legends protect their kingdoms even from the grave.